This week we are covering psychological disorders, and it's really one of our interesting weeks for students in particular. However, it's taken us a number of weeks to get to this point because psychology actually encompasses a wide variety of topics, not just psychological disorders. And I realize that when people think of psychology, this is the first thing they think about. However, psychology actually is a very broad field, and so psychological disorders is actually a very small part of that field. However, this week we're going to cover them, and hopefully you'll find this information interesting and informative. So when we start, we talk about abnormality and what is abnormality. So abnormal behavior, or the study of abnormal behavior, is called psychopathology. And so we have to decide what is abnormal behavior before we can figure out how to study it. So throughout the years, there have been different viewpoints on the abnormality and what it is and how you can measure it. So when we start, we talk about statistical definition. So one way to define normal and abnormal is to use statistics. So a frequently occurring behavior would be considered normal, and a behavior that's rare would be considered abnormal. And this definition works in some respects, because if you're talking to others, and most people have this normal range of how much you talk to people, and then people who talk too much would be abnormal, and people who talk too little would be abnormal. And that could fit because there's usually this normal range of communication. However, what about happiness? So do most people, aim for a medium level of happiness? So people who are too happy are abnormal, and people who are sad or not happy are abnormal. And so people just want to be, medium or mildly happy. It doesn't necessarily fit. And also, the same could be said of intelligence. So people who are highly intelligent are abnormal. And while it's not necessarily common, it's not something that's looked down upon. And so the statistical definition can fit in some regards, but it doesn't really encompass all of what's abnormal. So we look at social aspects. So what are the norms or the standards within the society? So refusing to wear clothing in a society that does not permit nudity would be abnormal. But deviance doesn't always equate with abnormality. So someone who chooses to be a monk and live in a monastery in the United States would be considered abnormal. Well, maybe it's rare, or maybe it's not the standard usual behavior, but it's not abnormal. And so that doesn't necessarily define all of abnormality either. So what about subject discomfort? So subject discomfort is really this emotional distress that people experience when they're having some abnormal reaction, or when they're engaging in some way that creates a fear in them. So if a woman suffers from anxiety and fear of going outside of her house, this creates anxiety within her, and she's distressed and she's unable to leave, and so this creates that emotional distress, which we considered abnormal, because most people can leave their house without a lot of distress. But abnormal behavior doesn't always create emotional distress. Someone who is a serial killer can harm someone or kill someone else, and they don't feel emotional distress. And so this fits, but not completely either. So then we look at maladaptive. So maladaptive is really how the person finds it hard to adapt to demands of living day-to-day life. So in the beginning, the behavior helped the person function. So the woman didn't want to leave her house, and so she stayed home, and that decreased her anxiety. So it was helpful in the beginning. It helped her feel less anxious. However, now she's finding it difficult to go to work or go to the grocery store or to run errands, anything like that. And so then this behavior has now created impacts within her daily living. And so now it's maladaptive. Now it isn't functioning for her in a way that's beneficial. And so when we look at abnormal behavior, And we're looking at various components of the behavior to decide whether it's abnormal or not. So is the behavior unusual? Does the behavior go against the social norms? Does the behavior cause the person significant emotional distress? Is it maladaptive? Does the behavior cause issues for the person or someone else? Does it harm them or someone else in some way? And so we look at these behaviors on a continuum, of course, as we do with all behaviors, to see if it's abnormal for the person or if it's functional.